Roger Thomas.
Yes, sir.
Becoming a good friend, I'd say.
Indeed.
We've had some good talks.
Absolutely.
I love so you're 22 years old.
Yes, sir.
I love getting to know from your perspective a young man who is honestly wise and mature beyond your years. I can't be the first person that said that to you.
Thank you.
You are getting married. I hope I'm not throwing out too many personal details here.
You can throw out as many personal details as you'd like. Honestly, it's okay.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So getting married, and we were just talking about how you met your now fiance.
That's right. Yeah, we met at a church in Mission Viejo. Can I shout it out?
Oh, please.
Oak House Church, Mission Viejo.
Okay.
Great place, small community, awesome place. Anyway, yeah, I had gone to Mariners Church. I went to UCI, played baseball there my first 2 years, and there was a group called FCA, which stands for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I had about 5 kids in my freshman class, and the majority of which were Christians. And so we all went to this group together, kind of, off and on. And I met a guy named Ali, who ended up being my kind of like life mentor. And he's actually going to be my best man in my wedding, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool.
But he had introduced me to the Bible and, all of that. And fast forward, I was going to Mariners Church with my teammates, which is in like Newport, Irvine area, right over here. And very big church, very tough to find community there. So I tell Ali, I say, hey, what do I do? Because I want to feel like I'm part of a community. He's like, come to my church. So I go to his church. I join this like life group of like 20-somethings like me, and I end up meeting Hannah, who's my fiance. Yeah. Enemies to lovers. She would roast me all the time, but we ended up getting coffee one time, and we talked for like 4 or 5 hours, and now we're here.
History, yeah.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, church, I want to talk a little more about faith and religion and what it means to you and your relationship to it. And because I grew up Jewish. I grew up was bar mitzvahed. Not very religious anymore, but definitely have my own relationship to faith and spirituality.
Sure.
And I'm open to all walks of life and different perspectives, and I love to learn about it. So curious your perspective and what role faith plays in your life and your relationship to your religion.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm very methodical, intellectual, and I kind of have to know like the details about things. And so, it was tougher for me to want to accept anything like that in my life, because I was like, this is different than like the scientific method, right? Faith is where your reason ends. That's one of the quotes you get told all the time in church groups and stuff like that. And so this was actually while I was living in Newport Beach during my sophomore year of college, and I was in a relationship that was solely based on the physical, which is something that we will no doubt touch on at some point.
Yeah.
This relationship came to an end pretty harshly, and my ex-girlfriend actually lived right next to me in Newport, and we broke up probably a week after we moved into. So it's
you
tough,
had to cross
right?
paths.
Cross paths. She's next door. Like just terrible situation, and I was done playing baseball at that time, and I kind of felt a little disenfranchised. Most of my buddies were baseball guys. They were always busy with baseball. I was working and going to school, and I just kind of didn't really have much of a meaning in my life. And keep in mind, I had been going to FCA, which was that Christian group, for the past year and a half. I didn't really take it much seriously. It was more so just because my buddies were Christian, and I kind of went with them. But there was just this like really bad situation that happened between me and my ex-girlfriend after we'd broken up, where there was some lying and deception on her part. And again, I wish her the best now, but like what went down kind of took me into a bit of a spiral. And I tell people this all the time. I was literally on my knees in my room at like 3 a.m. Her house next door is like bumping like Usher music. And, I just can't sleep. And I'm like, and I tried praying, months prior. And I finally got to a point where I prayed and I was like, God, if you're real, like I need help. Like I don't know what to do. I feel like I was at like my wit's end. And so I prayed that prayer and nothing crazy, nothing supernatural happened. I went to bed right after that, slept like a baby. But then a few days later, I get a text from my FCA leader and he says, hey, there's an opportunity to go to Israel for 10 days with a group to tour the sites, learn about the culture there, learn about the biblical history there. And I went almost reluctantly because New Year's was right around the corner at that point.
Okay.
And I was like, I want to party for New Year's. I want to drink my pain away. I want to do all this stuff. And I was like, man, I should go like Israel. Like it's kind of like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Yeah. And so I do it and I come back just like complete 180 different guy. And ever since then, I've kind of been the same way that I carry myself now. And obviously a big part of that is faith, is belief in God. And I'm not ashamed to talk about it. I mean, it's something different these days, especially for somebody my age. And I don't know. I mean, there's more I could get into there, but
what changed?
What changed?
Yeah. What do you notice?
Honestly, I think the biggest thing that changed in me was that I took responsibility for where I was at.
Wow.
Because when I was down bad, so to speak, and I was like cursing God / the universe, saying like, screw this, man. Like, why am I living next to my ex-girlfriend? I don't play the sport that I cared about so much anymore. It's like, what's going on? And I came back from that trip. Well, actually on that trip is when most of that happened. And I cried plenty of times, just feeling almost guilty, but forgiven at the same time. Like guilty that I had been so angry at God or so angry at the world. And I realized like, this is your fault, dude. Like the world's tilted and it's crooked and you're going to get, bit sometimes, but like a lot of time it is you who puts yourself in those situations. Yeah. And so I was just like, man, this has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
The way that you've been acting, the choices you've made. Yeah, that's probably what changed the most.
So extreme accountability, responsibility.
Yeah.
What was the catalyst for that? So you went on this trip, but how did that transformation happen?
I think it happened because, I mean, not to get too like religious here, but I feel like there was a supernatural element where I spent so much time just with my eyes closed in prayer, kind of just contemplating like how I got here and what happened. And I really tried to look at my situation from like an objective point of view and say like, hey man, how would this look if I was on the outside? And I'm like analyzing all the facts. And that's back to like the methodical part of me. But it served me good in this part of my life. And I just said, hey, dude, this, like, that's where you went wrong. That's where you went wrong. Like, people may have hurt you, but you almost allowed for that. And it's not this, like, David Goggins mentality that's, like, so extreme to where it's, like, I don't know, you're, like, red in the eyes and you're, like, veins popping. It's just more, like, taking responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You mentioned it kind of like this higher level of thinking. You said the word objectivity, objective thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely it. Like a way to view your life from an objective standpoint. So outside of yourself, free of insecurity or defensiveness. I think that's what a lot of people talk about when they, like psychedelics, for instance. That's growing a lot in the mental health community. And I think the reason for that is people at low dosages that aren't dangerous, they're able to shift the way they're thinking to a more objective standpoint so they could understand their life from a new perspective where they could have that objectivity and be able to then make changes in relation to that. So you access that naturally without a substance, right? But I think it's different ways to get to the same, and I'm not advocating for anything in particular, but I'm just saying that level of consciousness is something I've attained as well, and that it's really hard to get there. But I think that's where the magic happens, so to speak, where you could start making real changes in your life once you could view it from that outside perspective.
absolutely. No, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't able to get outside myself and ask myself how I got there in the first place. One thing that you touched on was like the psychedelic aspect of it. And I forget what I was watching a couple weeks ago, but there was something along I think it was a Jordan Peterson podcast, honestly. Okay. And like, Peterson sort of talks religiously a lot of the time, but he's not necessarily like a professing Christian or anything like that. But he sees utility in those things, especially for the reasons you just described about, you know, achieving perspectives that, you know, otherwise might take a substance or something along those lines. But he talked about how like psychologically, when you take something like that, all of the ethical hierarchies that are built up in your mind, all the preconceptions, all that stuff goes out the window, and you just get a full dose of reality, and you come out of it and you're like, oh crap, like that's what this is all about. Yeah. And so it's no wonder those things serve that purpose for people, right? Yeah. When they can just see things plainly without all of their bias in place. And it's like, it's pretty neat. Yeah. It's pretty neat.
What do you, from your perspective, how do you view the world? Like, what has that done for you? So obviously extreme responsibility, extreme ownership, extreme accountability. How else do you feel like it's impacted you?
Oh man, I honestly think I feel more empathy for people. It's just this like calmness that comes with it all. I feel like my breath isn't up here anymore. It's like it's kind of down here, and I feel more relaxed and like it's just like love. I think like that's like the root of all of it is like love. It's like there's times I get upset. There's times people will piss me off, and I say like screw that person for doing that. Whatever. Like I'm human, right? But at the end of the day, I don't know. I just feel like I'm like 10 years older than I was like 2 years ago, which is so weird. And we were having that age is just a number conversation. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm some like 60-year-old man trapped in my body right now, but like life has dealt with me in a way to where I'm so glad that it happened now and that I could, mature more. And I have so much more room. I bet you in 20 years when I watch this podcast, I'm going to look at that kid and say, you didn't know crap, dude. Yeah. You didn't know crap.
But the fact that you're open-minded to saying that now,
sure.
Like it's not about knowing all of it. It's about understanding that I don't know all of it, which you understand now, which is a gift, I think. Being open-minded to not knowing it all.
For sure.
I think that's knowing that you have room to grow. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned the age thing, and maturing and growing up, and something we were talking about before we started was like when a child becomes an adult and trust and how to learn how to trust yourself. And I'll go into my experience of that and my perspective on that in a second, but I want to hear from you. Like, do you feel like you can trust yourself at this point, or do you feel as though others' opinions shape your own opinions and how you trust yourself, or where are you at with that?
Sure. Like I told you before this, my mom was, a very controlling parent. My dad was a bit of the opposite, and that combination kind of allowed for me to grow up resenting my parents a little bit. Again, I loved them the whole way through, but it wasn't until college where I honestly started to look at my mom like a kid, and not in the sense that I disrespected her, but in the sense that like she lost her dad when she was young, and her mom had a tough time parenting them. And my dad had trauma he went through, and it's like they were 23, 24 when they first had me. It's like they were kids. Yeah. Like they were like my age, honestly. Yeah. And I'm like, crap, dude, like that's not easy. And so again, back to the empathy thing, I just had empathy for them. And through that empathy and through them recognizing that I was old enough to have certain conversations, I remember I was in a pool in Cabo with my mom, and she was probably like 2 skinny margaritas deep. And she just starts pouring out on me about how sorry she felt about how she raised us. And I told her, I said, it's okay. I said, you love me. Like you love me so much, and you were just a kid. You were just doing it for the first time. And those conversations, over the hump of those conversations was like, my parents are like my best friends now.
Wow.
And I just love them even more. And so with that, I do trust myself, because not that I look at everybody like a grown-up kid or like a big kid, but I look at everybody like a human, you know, who's sort of just trying to figure it out, man.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure it out too.
Yeah.
And that helps in business, and it helps in life, and just helps all around.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the key aspect, humanizing your parents and humanizing everyone else around you. Because as we were talking about before, what I see so often in my work is people that haven't made that transition from childhood to adulthood. And what I mean by that is it's not about age, but what I see is when we're children, we're basically taught, you know, listen to your parents, or we look to them as what's right, what's wrong, or be careful, or they're giving these instructions to us, and we're listening because that's our parents. They're the ones guiding us. When we go through that as a child, a lot of times kids take away the message, okay, trust these other people, these adults, they know better. Don't trust my instincts, because my instincts are wrong, because when I act out on my instincts, I might get punished, right? Or I might be put in timeout or told that that's wrong. So I learned not to trust myself. I learned to trust their opinions of right and wrong. Well, when I get older and I'm able to have more intellectual conversations and understand right and wrong from my own perspective, a lot of people never learn to trust their own perspective, despite the fact that they're valid in their perspective. They're adults. Yeah. You know, they have lived experience at that point. So they know right from wrong from their own perspective, and it might differ from their parents' perspective. It's
true.
So humanizing their parents and understanding, okay, their parents knew right from wrong in comparison to maybe a 2-year-old, but I'm not a 2-year-old anymore. I could frame my own point of view. But so many people never learn to trust their own perspective over their parents or over other adults or friends. And the message they receive is, I can't trust my own self. I can't trust my opinion. And then they're making decisions based on what other people are doing or what their parents might approve of. And that, to me, it's funny. I work sometimes with clients that are older than me, and I see the maturity level, and a lot of times they never got to that point where they could trust themselves. And they might be an adult, but they present like a child in that way. And and I don't mean they're immature entirely, but the child in them comes out a lot in our work, because I get a front row seat. I get to see the inner workings, and it's a theme and a pattern that I've noticed, and I see how it affects the psyche and the sense of self and the sense of identity for these people. And it can be really detrimental if I never learn to trust myself. So I think of 22-year-olds, not many of them have that ability to trust themselves to that extent. That is interesting, your maturity level in comparison to a lot of other people your age.
That's definitely interesting. I mean, I feel blessed, honestly. I feel blessed that I've been able to have those conversations with mostly my mom, but also my dad as well. And those have been different conversations because they're different people.
Yeah.
Right? But no, man, it's just such an interesting topic, because like, what do you think it is that tips people over to experience, like those clients you said, right?
Yeah.
The ones that are older, but like you almost sense like a childlike nature about them.
Yeah.
What experience do you think they didn't have, or what breakthrough do you think they didn't have? Like, what do you think it is that transforms?
I think eventually you get so miserable living based on other people's opinions that's what leads to the breakthrough. It's a lack of identity, and there's this thing inside of me, this depression or anxiety, and I don't know what it is. But when we dig in and we do that work, it comes out that I've been making decisions all along that aren't even close to being in line with my true values. I've been making decisions based on everyone else's opinions. So if I'm doing that all the time, how am I supposed to ever be happy? You know, I might have all the money in the world, all the power in the world, but I'll still be miserable because I'm not living a life that I actually wanted. So that's why you see so many people reach these goals and are still so empty inside, because those goals are based on other people's values and not their own. So it's impossible to be happy despite the accomplishments.
Honestly, I feel like that's true. That's true. It's very true. When I was in high school, and my mom would be super controlling over me, and part of it was justified because I'd go out and, you know, do stuff that was not responsible. But I almost felt good rebelling because I felt like, you know, at least this is my choice, man.
Yeah.
And my fiance, and she'd be fine with me saying this, but like, I feel like it's a stereotype when your girl asks like, hey, where are we going to dinner? And you're like, why don't you pick? And she all of a sudden she's like panicking, not panicking like instantly, but like she can't decide. Right. And me getting a degree in psychology and maybe just being partly the person I am, like, look at that. And I'm like, what's going on there? Like, and then I get to know her more and more. And I found out, well, she had kind of a controlling mom who didn't let her get a word out. And, you know, it's like, now she has a tough time making decisions. And so one of the things that I do with her is I say, hey, I love you, but I'd like you to decide where we're going to eat tonight.
Wow.
And so we'll sit there, and eventually, more often than not, she will pick something.
Yeah.
And we'll both be happy. And it's her practicing, right?
And that's how people learn to trust themselves, is by making decisions, seeing that they didn't die. It's all okay.
Yeah.
And the decision worked out. Okay, I could make another decision for myself based on what I really want. And that's how they learn to build that trust. And then slowly but surely after that, you learn to build an identity based on an accumulation of those experiences, based on living in line with what you really want. It's interesting how that happens. That's a good exercise that you're doing with your fiance.
It's been super helpful because one of the things that I feel like I do well is like make decisions. And honestly, this is probably like a more masculine tendency to you know, want to have control over like factors of life or whatnot. And so maybe it goes hand in hand. But at the same time, I want her to feel confident in that. I want her to be able to make decisions. I want her to, you know, not have to look for approval. Right? So it's been a super helpful exercise.
Yeah. I want to touch on, so you mentioned your previous relationship with an ex-girlfriend and how it was based a lot on physicality.
Right.
And what I've come into contact with a lot of clients at times, in line with kind of what we're talking about, other people's opinions. So how does that even bleed into relationships?
Yeah.
And I've had clients that stay in relationships or are only in relationships because the other person is really attractive, and despite the red flags, the client that I'm seeing stays with this other person because they feel a sense of pride being around someone that's attractive. And when they go out in public, they feel proud to be walking with this person, despite all the red flags going on behind closed doors. And so they're not happy underneath it, but they don't know how to get through that, I guess, in the sense of, if I go to this other person that may not be as attractive, but is actually fulfilling my needs, I feel a sense of shame. I feel a sense of embarrassment walking around, and I want to feel, so it's the sense of, do I want a short-term positive feeling walking around with someone that might look good, or do I want a long-term fulfillment, satisfaction around getting my needs met within a relationship? So I'm curious, I don't know if that was your experience, but the physicality of it with this ex-girlfriend,
Sure.
I mean, how did that play in despite the dynamics? Like, what were the dynamics?
Sure. I think that, you know, as a freshman in college, like meeting this girl who obviously I found attractive, where I probably wouldn't have started dating her, right? I didn't realize the impact that a sexual relationship would have on me. Obviously, both of us are involved, but, you know, chemically, for everyone watching, like, people know that like when you have sex with somebody, like something chemically happens to where you feel a bond and you want to go back. You want to go back, right? I didn't know about that. I didn't think about that. And then I found myself in a place where I was so dependent, not dependent in the sense that like I couldn't, live my day out unless I like gave her a hug in the morning or something like that.
Yeah.
But I felt dependent in the sense that like I was scared to lose her, not because she was wife material, but I was scared to lose her because it was a source of, carnal pleasure.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, that's exactly what it was. And I remember sitting down with my FCA mentor, Ali, and I told him, I said, man, how am I going to love somebody after this, after all this went down? And he goes, I don't think that you know exactly what it means to be in love.
Yeah.
And 2, it's going to be a crap ton better than what you've experienced. And at the time I thought he was hitting me with some, BS cliches. I was like, thanks, dude.
Yeah.
And now I sit here and I look back and I'm like, he's absolutely right. I'm like, he's absolutely right. Because this is something interesting, but me and my fiance, we're going to wait till marriage to have sex, which is like, if you asked me a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, if that was me, I would have said, yeah, good luck, dude. No, like I need to go for a test drive or like whatever metaphor you want to use. But, and again, I'm not going to shame people who make the decision to, do that before marriage, but like I have found it to be so helpful because I know that the feelings that we have for each other are not, contradicting with these biological inclinations of like, I want to reproduce with you right now. And it's been a weird experience. It's been incredibly difficult. But it's something that we had both decided early on and something that we've, thankfully held to. And again, I want to like highlight the fact that like, if you're going to go and do that, like do it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and,
I had a different experience.
Okay.
And I'm curious if you think premarital sex can be a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, okay. So here's something that we've actually talked about. I think this might've been a topic when we were filming some stuff earlier, but, there is utility in premarital sex. There's no doubt about it, right? There is no doubt about getting acquainted with someone on a more vulnerable level that allows for the expansion of your relationship into something deeper than it was before. There's no doubt about that.
Well said.
But it's a means to an end, right? And again, there's no shame. There's no shame in it. Again, I really want to iterate that I'm not sitting here trying to shame people who are having sex out of wedlock. Right?
I understand. Yeah.
I have luckily found that end by a different means. And that means is not having sex.
Yeah.
And it's worked for me. And again, this is all tied up in the religious tradition at the same time. So it's not like I just thought of this out of nowhere. Like I saw it on like Twitter and I was like, oh, I'm going to try that. Because well, first of all, that probably wouldn't be on Twitter. But second of all, it wasn't random. So it's been great. It's been tough.
I think the reason that works for you is because you're able to access that level of vulnerability without that. Knowing myself and my experience and knowing how open I'm willing to be with people, I don't think I would have gotten to that level of vulnerability without premarital sex. And fortunately, I had a good experience with my wife to the sense of like it opened up more vulnerability in a positive way. But to your point, I think it very well could have gone the other direction if it wasn't the right person. Whereas that vulnerability then becomes a reliance or a dependence. So I understand that. Knowing myself, I don't think I would have been capable of reaching the level of vulnerability necessary for a deeper, more meaningful relationship without doing that first. I think maybe at this point, if I wasn't married, if I was venturing into a new relationship, at this point in my journey, I think I'd be capable of that, but not at that age. I think that allowed me to overcome my own insecurities and defenses because I felt safe with that person.
Sure.
Yeah, but I could see how it could so easily, if it's not someone that is safe, or someone that, you know, does have toxic traits, or the relationship dynamic isn't healthy, I could see how it could quickly turn the opposite direction. Absolutely. I think it's very interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective before, though.
No. And again, I think that's part of why I decided to do what I'm doing now, is because I experienced on several occasions that feeling of being intimate with someone and it panning out to nothing more than
what does that mean to you? Being intimate with someone in a not physical way. Like, how are you vulnerable with your fiance? Okay. What does that look like?
Just for clarification, the intimacy I was referring to before when I got hurt was the physical.
Yeah.
Right. But in terms of intimacy nowadays with my fiance, I think one of the things that's, and this isn't a segue, but it's going to seem like it for a second. One of the things that's interesting about Christianity is there's a reliance on the idea that the word of God is transformative. And in the Christian tradition, Jesus is thought of as the word. And the Greek word for word, which kind of sounds weird, but the Greek word for word is logos or logos. And oftentimes you hear that in like English class in high school talking about like the logical aspect of someone's argument, right? But in terms of like Christian or Greek philosophy, the logos was essentially the transformative word or dialogue that happened that could change the potential of what's around you into something good. And so between me and her, we've had dialogue, which is dia logos, and it's been this transformative experience between both of us where like I feel infinitely closer to my fiance than I have with anybody ever. And I think part of that, again, as a Christian, I'd say part of it is God's grace on me, but also part of it is, like, practically speaking, it would be the dialogue that I've had with her. It would be us coming to each other saying, you know what, there's a chance that both of us are evil, and we likely are, but nonetheless, we're going to step forward in good faith and trust each other. And it's been a blessing to find someone like her who's willing to engage in that dialogue, literally. And that's allowed us to talk about things, about our past specifically. Yeah, man, it's just been vulnerable about how broken we are and how in need of change we both are. Not that we're like drug addicts on the street or something like that, but we're humans who are full of snakes, who need to deal with things, and she's been helpful in that, in participating.
How do you guys argue? Do you argue? Do you trust each other infinitely to the point of no argument? I don't know.
No, so something that I honestly like about her, like when I took her mom out to lunch to ask her for her permission to marry her daughter, she asked me, she's like, "Why do you love Hannah?" And I was like, well, it's kind of a loaded question, but like off the top of my head, I feel like our relationship exists in this airtight bubble of love where we can argue about anything for almost any duration of time. I don't mean months or, things like that, but like a whole day we could argue. And at the end of the day, we know we're not going to leave each other, or like we know our relationship is solid. And so I think when we argue from that place of like, you're my person, there's a bit of a safety where you can be honest and vulnerable instead of, because like say, for example, your relationship isn't secure and you're afraid to tell the truth. It's like, you should be more afraid of what happens if you don't, right? Because those things come out of the closet and they bite you. And that's exactly what happened to me before. And I've learned my mistakes from my mistakes. And now I just tell her the truth. And it works. It's like, it's crazy how it works to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Right?
You mentioned safety. I think that's the key word there is emotional safety. Yeah. Just knowing that you can have that experience and share that with someone and they won't leave you. You can tell the truth because they have proven that they can handle it. You are safe with them. Yeah. It's hard to find that person.
It's real hard, man. It's real tough. And even for like our relationship isn't perfect. Nobody's is, right? And there's times where she gets afraid that I'm going to leave her because of, some disagreement we had, and part of that is her vulnerable feminine side, coming out. But I just have to be there to reassure her. And that's part of the bigger picture. That's part of this, the safety picture is like, I'm there to tell her like, hey, these thoughts you're having about me leaving for, some irrelevant reason, it's like they're real in the sense that you're experiencing them, but they're almost like ghosts because they're not representative of what's actually going on. Mm-hmm. And it's just, again, dialogue.
That was well said. Thank you. You're a good talker. You validate, and I didn't mean that in like a sarcastic way.
No. I didn't think so.
You validate her experience while still reassuring that that's not actually what's going on for you. I think that's people could learn from your communication tools. Where did you learn?
Lucky, man.
Where did you learn how to communicate effectively like that?
Do you mean like verbal communication or
yes.
like verbal? Honestly, I attribute part of it to like sarcasm and like comedy, so to speak. Like when I grew up playing baseball, and like, if you've played sports at any point in your life, you know that there's joshing around and stuff like that. And you respect your teammates enough not to get into any physical altercations with them. So you're left with, how could I verbally roast the crap out of them, and maybe I have somewhat of like a proclivity to roast people better or something maybe. But like whenever I was young, I could always like roast people like quick.
Yeah.
And I just kind of ran with that. And at some point I was a douche. Like when I was like 13 or 14, like I was probably like a douchebag. But then I got into high school and I started to kind of use that to build team morale, because we'd have these skits, and then in college that continued, and we'd make like SNL skits before games basically. And I'd act in them.
I love it.
And so, I think that helped. My dad was also a good communicator.
Okay.
Well-spoken, and, obviously he raised me.
Yeah.
So that helps. Yeah.
You don't seem to have this mental filter that I see so many people have.
Could you explain mental filter?
Mental filter.
Mental.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think just so many people it comes back to fear around other people's judgments, around not feeling safe, around the fact that I might need to act or behave in a certain way. So I go through this filter in my brain. I did it for years, where the amount of space between my thought in my head to it actually exiting through my mouth, that was a long process.
I see.
And it was just, the filter was based on, will my parents approve of this? Will people think I'm weird? Will people reject me? And it just goes on and on and on. And then if it gets through the filter and it's like, okay, that's an acceptable thing to express, then it would exit my mouth.
Okay.
You seem to have a very fluid, like you think it and it comes out, and it comes out articulately.
Well, that's good news.
I think
I'm glad.
That's an indication of emotional safety and a sense of self and a sense of identity. So you're confident in what you say, and you know that your intentions, you trust yourself.
Sure.
Going back to the point that we initially brought up.
I see. That's actually interesting because back when I was in like middle school, and honestly, ever since I was a kid, I had like a really bad stutter, like terrible stutter. And we would do like popcorn reading in class. Or, like you pass the mic and we're reading like a social studies textbook, and I'm like sweating. I'm sweating, and then, like the mic gets to me and I sound like I'm crying. I'm like, dude, this is the worst experience ever. I'm like, put me in like the special classes, even though I'm not, supposed to be there.
Yeah.
I just don't want to read in front of people.
Yeah.
And like now, I enjoy these conversations. I enjoy being able to, talk and articulate things. And I've even got to like preach to our youth ministry at my church. And like, I could never see myself up on a stage like that, doing something like that. But I think it does come from having identity and feeling safe in the way that I, think about things and the way that I say things. And honestly, part of it too is you, Alex. Like I feel comfortable talking to you.
Oh,
so
thank you.
I'd be more careful with somebody that I didn't know. I'd probably filter things a little bit more, but for the sake of this conversation and having quality dialogue, I think, being truthful in my speech is, going to take us the furthest. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think I want to go back to your trust in yourself, though, in the sense of, I think you trust yourself. And I feel the same way about myself, where I trust that even if it doesn't come out appropriately, or if it comes out maybe, sometimes I come off a little hot. Like I could get a little aggressive, right? But I trust that if it doesn't come out that way that I want it to, I trust that my intentions were good and I could then repair later. So I could apologize if I'm aware of it in the moment, or if someone takes it in a way that I didn't mean for it. Oh, okay, no problem. Like, then we can have a dialogue around that. But I think it goes back to just trusting yourself that you don't need a filter. You will be, if you're accepted for what you say, great. And if you're rejected, it's kind of like, okay, well, did I articulate what I actually meant? And if I did, and I'm not accepted, it's not really my problem.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That's like a sense of security, I guess.
I think I see what you're saying. And as you were explaining that, something came to my head where it was like, I forget what great philosopher said this, but it was something along the lines of like, let your thoughts die, not, you. And so I feel like that relates to the security in the sense that I feel like I've put myself through enough, philosophical pondering to where it's like, I can be confident in the framework that I have about, my life and my own perception, so that I'm not sitting here, worrying about what's coming out of my mouth. And that might sound prideful. And
no, I don't think so.
Maybe it is in some sense, but
secure.
But at the same time, I think it is just me being secure, because it's not like I'm sitting here like boasting or anything like that. It's just that I feel confident in my framework.
Yeah.
It's allowed me to prosper, and it allows for a fluid stream of thought where I'm not filtering.
I think security is confidence mixed with open-mindedness.
That's good.
So I think arrogance is closed-mindedness. So there's confidence there, but it's like, no, my way is the right way. Whereas if I say something and it's taken offensively, for instance, I am open-minded to the fact that I might have done something that hurt somebody else, and I can then dial it back. But I have the internal conversation with myself of, was that what I meant? So I'm open-minded to the fact that I could be wrong here. But do I stand by what I said?
Yeah.
And if I do, then okay, that's security. It's not arrogance. It's just I communicated what I meant to communicate. But I think you have that element of security where it is open-mindedness mixed with confidence. It doesn't come across arrogant to me.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I don't feel like I'm trying to like one up anybody or anything like that.
And I think that's why we're able to have these conversations, because I feel I'm open-minded to what you have to say. I enjoy talking to you, and I feel that from you as well. And that's when you get two people willing to do that. I think that's where healthy, fun relationships are made.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you brought up like philosophy, and we were talking briefly before we started about like questions that you're pondering right now. Like, you've done a lot of work on yourself and asking yourself questions about the world and about your life. But what are things that you're pondering right now these days? Yeah,
man, these are like far out in the like materialist sense, like far out as in like, this almost sounds like folklore,
I love
crazy stuff. But like, back to that idea of the word of God, or like the logos. Jesus is thought of as the word of God within scripture, within the Christian tradition. And that word logos comes from Greek philosophy, which, as I mentioned earlier, it essentially means the like force that holds things together. And so you might think of your dialogue as this force that can bring about positive change, right? Or negative change, depending on how you use it. But when the logos is utilized properly, it extracts what is chaotic and full of potential and brings it together into something that's comprehensible and good. And so it's this interesting philosophy, and I've applied it to my life, not through the lens of Greek philosophy, but through the lens of Christianity. And you might say those are almost synonymous because they sort of like line up. But my questions about that just kind of are just so deep, where I'm like, how do these things all fit together? Like, I honestly don't even know if I could articulate it without getting into like Bible verses and things like that. But just, I think for the sake of this conversation, it's me looking deeper than what might be presented in a mainstream church that people go to on the weekends just to feel good. It's me trying to understand how the world is laid out, how my perception as a human is so unique compared to the rest of the animal kingdom, compared to the rest of, at least for what we know, the universe. I mean, apparently the government's talking about aliens and UFOs now, but like, I don't know yet. As far as I know, the human consciousness is as high as it goes before you get to something like God. And so it's like, that's kind of cool. How does that work? It's like, I feel like scientists don't exactly know how consciousness works. There's some ideas, and it's like, but it's like, no, it's like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
It's weird. So
we don't know what we don't know.
No, for sure. So that's been on my mind.
Yeah. I think it's fun. I think when you were talking about that, something that came up for me was something a good friend of mine said a long time ago, but he said you could put a bug on like a chemistry book and they can't read it. They could walk on it, but they don't have the level of consciousness or the capacity to read it. What is that for humans? Like the answers, all these things could be right in front of our face, and we just don't have the capacity to even fathom any of it.
That's a whole podcast right there.
Yeah.
For sure. No, but that's right in line with what I'm thinking about, because I always talk to my fiance about this. I'm like, what do you think it's like to be a dog? And we'll come to the conclusion like, well, it's like something. Like it's not nothing. Like there's something there, but how could you even comprehend that as a human being, right? It's just so weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely feel you on that point.
Yeah, I find it weird. I'm sure there's some scientific explanation for some of these things.
Sure.
What I was going to bring up, like scientists are like, oh, when dogs eat this, it tastes. Someone said recently to me, dogs eating like a carrot tastes like chocolate. It's like, how the hell do you know that?
That's a great question.
How can you compare a dog's taste buds to ours, and like how? And I don't know. It made no sense to me.
No,
so,
I can't help you there.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
That was just a random tangent. It came up recently, and I was like, I don't even know how any scientist could know that.
That's deep.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the moral of the story is that we don't know what we don't know.
No.
I'd love to have a podcast with you about aliens and go into that direction.
No, like I said, that's a whole different direction. But
yeah,
that's essentially what I've been kind of pondering in life right now. And when I first became a Christian, it was difficult for me to accept those things because I thought so deeply about stuff, and like that's a blessing and a curse. Even aside from religion, thinking deeply is a blessing and a curse, right?
Agreed.
Ignorance, honestly, is kind of bliss.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? But
there's a reason that's a saying.
Yes. But then as I look back now and I say, you know what? Like, because I've talked to plenty of people, Christian or not, and the same answer they give me is like, you know what? Like, you should be happy that you think deeply about things. You should be happy that you're willing to ponder stuff. Because I used to think it was like this ultimate curse where I was like, I'm going to be stuck in contemplation for the rest of my life, and I'm never going to come to any conclusions about anything. And it's like, well, you kind of grow up and you start to form, some conclusions about stuff. But also, why would you want to be stuck in ignorance?
Yeah.
Why would you want to be stuck there? Like again, back to the consciousness, like you have a mind capable of pondering the universe. It's like, wow, lucky you.
Keep it open.
Keep it open. Yeah. So that's where I've been at mentally.
How do you feel about uncertainty? Is that tough for you to sit with?
Uncertainty regarding what specifically?
So these questions that you're asking, some of these deeper questions, what if there is no answer? How do you sit with that?
Yeah, I think, man, at least from a Christian perspective, like if I was sitting here today as like a pastor and you were asking me that question, I'd say, well, there's plenty of scriptures in the Bible that talk about, God just being on such a different level to where there's things that you just can't comprehend. And I think even take God out of the picture, right? Back to what you were saying about humans being able to perceive things. It's like there's stuff right in front of us that we can't perceive. Like, could you imagine if we had like microscopic vision right now and we were seeing all the particles that are floating in the air? It's like, well, thank God we don't have that, because then it's like you'd have an infinite number of things to look at.
Yep.
And in some sense, you already do have an infinite number of things to look at, but your mind is oriented in such a way that like we can focus on this conversation. So in terms of uncertainty, I don't worry too much at the end of the day. Back to something I said earlier, was like faith begins where your reasoning ends, and I struggle with that, but I'm comfortable enough to not lose sleep over it.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Because I personally struggle with that as well.
Okay.
Like having faith and just kind of chalking it up to that.
Yeah.
And just sitting with.
Now, when you say faith, do you mean like the realm of like, I'm uncertain that like, I'm going to save up enough for retirement, or do you mean something bigger?
Something bigger.
Something bigger.
Something bigger.
Yeah.
And
it's real.
Yeah, I think I have such an internal curiosity to know, and I love to know. Mm-hmm. And sitting with not knowing, I can do it, but it's frustrates me.
It does frustrate.
I think we're very similar in that. I think because I'm a deep thinker in that way, I love to analyze. I love to look at things. Yeah. I love to know the answers.
That's good. One of the problems that I've had with Christianity, and I'm comfortable saying this, is like so many churches that you go to, it's just almost like a TED Talk where it's like, here's how you're going to feel better this week. And don't forget Jesus, right? Something beautiful that's happened since going to a smaller church is that they don't really care if people like pay a bunch of money to tithe, or like they're just trying to spread the gospel. Like that's what they would say, is like, we're trying to spread the gospel. And with that has come, messages that are deeper, and not so much PowerPoint presentations on how to improve your life. Right. And so when I look at Christians who have like a superficial faith, which in my opinion is the majority of them, I almost feel like there's a disservice being done, because it's like, are you just believing because, your grandparents believed and your parents believed, or it's like, have you made this belief for yourself? And within Christianity, that's exactly what it is. It is your individual belief in Christ. It's not, do you go to church?
Yeah.
And that's where people get mixed up a lot. And not to get too deep into like the theology here, but like the mainline Christian belief is that the works that you do on earth, the kind of person you are, whether you're good or bad, it's like, that isn't exactly the goal. The goal is whether or not you have faith that Jesus died for your sins. And now the caveat of that is, if you believe that, then your life is likely to change. But it's not that you start a charity and you're given a room in heaven, right?
Yeah.
It's not like that. But to your point though, about the faith and the uncertainty, it's like, it wasn't until I started to look at it for myself and say like, man, I grew up in a Christian household where I just kind of assumed like, this is it, right? I almost had to step outside the faith and say, is this worth believing in? And obviously I've come to the conclusion that like, yes, it is. And it's just been through research and through lived experience and, through hours of disagreeing with people, Christians, I mean, not telling atheists they're wrong. I'm talking about Christian mentors who I say, what about this?
Yeah.
And they say, and they have the humility to tell me, I don't know, but I'm going to find out for you. And that's been so huge. The people in my life have been so huge because they haven't tried to groom me at all.
Yes. Well said. Yeah.
So
I think you've been fortunate enough to have that experience, but like you said, that's not the majority's experience. And I think that's when we kind of run into trouble as a society, and arguments and, I mean, wars.
Sure. Sure. It's deep.
Yeah.
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 No, but I'm not going to try to evangelize to you necessarily on this podcast, because again, back to like the Christian tradition, like it is your individual journey. It is not for me to try and shove this down your throat. Like that's beyond backwards from what, Jesus teaches and what the Bible tells us. And so, I might pray for you, but like, and that might sound weird, but like,
I appreciate it.
It's like not even like, it's just not weird to me anymore. Like, it's just like, I care about you. And again, I don't feel like I'm coming to you from somewhere higher, because again, back to I keep saying the Christian tradition, but like the idea is that everybody has fallen short before God. Like everybody is broken. I'm just as broken as you. Yeah. Like I'm just as undeserving as you. And I'm also equally as deserving.
Yeah.
Right. It's cool.
Yeah.
So No, there's no hard feelings, and I'm honestly glad you've allowed me to even talk about some of this stuff, because it's been part of my life for sure.
It sounds like it's all rooted in empathy and love.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Man, Roger Thomas, always a pleasure. Always, always a pleasure. You'll be back. We'll go deeper on more of these conversations.
Let's do it, dude.
But I so appreciate you jumping on and chatting with me.
Anytime.